The Mongol invasions of Japan in 1274 and 1281 led by Kublai Khan, a significant military effort aimed at expanding the Mongol Empire. The initial attack in 1274 with a force of 40,000 from Korea and China met fierce resistance from samurai warriors and was thwarted by a devastating typhoon. Undaunted, Kublai Khan mounted a larger assault in 1281, this time involving 140,000 men, but it too was defeated by another typhoon. The Japanese termed it Kamikaze, or divine wind. These defeats not only marked the Mongols' first major military failures due to external forces, but also reinforced the samurai's valor and reputation, had a profound impact on Japanese culture, and ultimately showed the world that the Mongols were not as invincible as they seemed. Hello and welcome to the channel. Is it your first time here? If it is, it's good to meet you, and if you are coming back, great to see you again. We're off on another adventure together. As always, if you want to support the channel, you're already doing it. Congratulations. Liking and subscribing also helps grease the wheels a little bit, but for those who want to go above and beyond, take a look in the video description. You'll find where you want to go. But first, priorities. Let's all get nice and relaxed, and I'll take you back to medieval Japan, the tumultuous 13th century, where the Mongols are knocking at the door. After enduring multiple Mongol invasions between 1231 and 1281, Korea, under the Goryeo dynasty, eventually capitulated to Mongol demands, signaling a treaty that positioned Goryeo as a vassal state to the great and, frankly, intimidating Mongol Empire. Kublai Khan, who was declared Khagan of the Mongol Empire in 1260, although not universally acknowledged by all Mongol factions, particularly in the West, later established his capital in modern-day Beijing in 1264. In Japan, governance was under the control of the Hojo clan, who acted as shiken, or regents, for the shogunate. They gained prominence following the death of Minamoto no Yorie, the shogun, in 1203, consolidating power through strategic marriages and quite a few political maneuvers. The Hojo effectively sidelined traditional governance structures such as the Council of the Shogunate, the imperial court in Kyoto, and their Gokunin vassals, opting instead to make key decisions within the confines of their private residence in sessions known as Yoriai. Additionally, the Mongols endeavored to extend their influence to the native populations of Sakhalin, that being the Ainu and the Nivka, from 1264 to 1308. But, despite these efforts, there is skepticism regarding whether these activities were genuinely aimed at facilitating an invasion of Japan, or merely represented broader attempts at expanding Mongol control in the region. Either way, between 1266 and 1273, the great Mongol Empire under Kublai and its vassal, the Goryeo Kingdom, attempted to bring Japan under Mongol control through diplomatic missions first, always try the peaceful route. Well, despite sending 6 envoys to demand Japan's submission, the Japanese simply ignored them. They were not having it. And the Mongols, well, they did not like being ignored. Thus, in 1265, a citizen from Goryeo advised Kublai of the strategic importance of subjugating Japan. Accepting this counsel, Kublai appointed Hyuk-chuk and Un-hong as his emissaries, instructing them to travel via Goryeo and be accompanied by Goryeo envoys. Wonjong of Goryeo, complying with this request, added his officials Sun Kun-bi and Kim Chan to the mission. However, their journey was disrupted by a storm, forcing the Mongol envoys to return to their court, much to Kublai's displeasure. On their subsequent attempt, Kublai insisted that Wonjong ensure the envoys reach Japan, exacerbating tensions within Goryeo itself. And during this period, Goryeo's internal politics were strained enough as it is. Kublai's demands led to a confrontation in which a Mongol general, Uya Son-dal, was killed by Kim Chun, a powerful Goryeo official. This act of defiance seemed to have put Wonjong in a rather precarious position, fearing Mongol reprisal while dealing with Kim's increasing insolence. Eventually, Wonjong, in collusion with another official who despised Kim, lured him to court, and once he got there, he was executed. Better luck next time. Meanwhile, the Mongol and Goryeo envoys faced outright disrespect in Japan. Not even a warm, or at least a lukewarm welcome, but an ice-cold shoulder. After being denied entry to the capital, they were lodged outside the city at Tajabu, where they were poorly received and ultimately dismissed after 5 months without any substantive response. Kublai, incredulous at the disregard shown to his representatives, suspected manipulation by Wonjong and dispatched another mission led by Hyuk-chuk and the Goryeo envoy Simsa-jun. Despite their efforts, this mission too proved to be fruitless, with envoys leaving Japan in 1268 after their overtures were rebuffed. Now, there is a letter that was written from the Mongol side to the Japanese, and it is wrote thusly in a fair amount of diplomatic language. And I'll read from the following letter now. The Emperor of the Great Mongols, being commissioned by heaven, hereby respectfully presents a letter to the King of Japan. From time immemorial, rulers of small states, the borders of which they closely adjoin, have always endeavored to maintain friendly relationships with each other, and have manifested mutual respect and trust. On our part, we, from the time of our forefathers, have received the mandate of heaven, and have ruled the universe. Innumerable people in far-off lands have learned to fear our power, and have longed for our virtuous rule. When we first ascended to the throne, the innocent and the helpless people of Korea had suffered for long from military struggles. We therefore offered a cessation of hostilities, restored their land, and returned the captive Koreans, young and old. In gratitude, both ruler and people of Korea now present themselves at our court. Although the legal relation between ourselves and the Koreans is that of sovereign and subjects, yet in feeling we are as father and children. We assume that your Highness and your subjects have known this. Korea is our eastern tributary state. Japan is located near to Korea, and since her founding has time and again established relations with the Middle Kingdom. However, since our accession, you have not sent an envoy to our court, nor have you indicated a desire to establish friendly relations with us. We are afraid this is because your kingdom has not yet been well informed of this. Therefore, we now send a special envoy bearing our state papers to inform you of our desire. We hope that henceforth you will enter into friendly relations with us, and that both our people and yours will enjoy peace and harmony. Moreover, the sages consider the entire universe one family. Therefore, if we should not establish friendly relations with each other, how could it be in accordance with the doctrine of one family? Who would care to appeal to arms? I hereby leave the matter to your Highness's careful consideration. End of the letter from the Mongols to the Japanese king. In 1269, a delegation composed of 70 Koreans and Mongols arrived on the island of Tsushima, tasked with securing a response from Japan to Kublai Khan's demands. While the Japanese imperial court was inclined to reply, the Kamakura shogunate, which held real power, chose to override this decision. A letter formally rejecting the Mongol demands was drafted, but ultimately it was never sent. Following this, Kublai dispatched a final diplomatic mission in late 1270 led by Zhao Bei. This mission, which included 24 scribes, faced hostility soon after their arrival in Japan in 1271. They were denied an audience with the Japanese king, and after delivering their message and receiving no reply, they were forced to simply pack their things and return home, empty-handed and somewhat disappointed. Not even a good holiday, that's for sure. Zhao Liangbi waited until 1273 for a response before finally returning to China. Upon his return, he advised Kublai against launching an invasion of Japan, citing the Japanese people's warlike nature and the country's lack of significant wealth as deterrents, pretty much telling him that if we do go there, we're going to lose a lot of men, and there's barely anything to plunder anyway. If you were going to turn them into a tributary, they wouldn't really be able to pay too much. The game is simply not worth the candle. Meanwhile, the Japanese took the threats posed by these missions very seriously, particularly after the second mission in 1268. Perceiving it as a sign of impending invasion, Japan mobilized its religious institutions, directing Shinto shrines and Buddhist temples to pray for the repulsion of foreign forces. The central government also suspended most of its regular activities to focus on bolstering defenses, especially in Kyushu, the region closest to the Korean peninsula, and thus the most likely point of any invasion. In April of 1274, under the Yuan Dynasty's directive, commanders Holdon and Hong Da-gu were tasked with organizing the invasion force, assembling 15,000 men for this purpose. Korean General Kim Bang-yong was pivotal in the construction of the naval fleet, overseeing the building of various ship types inspired by southern Chinese designs. Notably, involved was Qi Gongzhi from Shandong province, who after aiding in ship design was sent to Korea and subsequently Xiangyang to assist in military efforts against southern China. The fleet comprised 3 different types of ships: 300 large transports known as 1,000 Dan ships, 300 Bartolu fast boats, and 300 supply tenders. Hong Da-gu managed the large transports construction, while Cha-chi oversaw the fast boats. The labor, materials, and funding for this project were provided by Goryeo, though not without protests due to the immense burden it placed on them. One can hardly imagine the pay was very good either. While the shipbuilding was completed by July the 5th, 1274, but the fleet's departure was delayed until the 7th lunar month due to administrative delays and the death of Wonjong, the Korean monarch, in July of that same year. The strategic plan outlined by Kublai involved initial assaults on Tsushima and Iki before the main landing at Hakata Bay. The Japanese defense strategy was straightforward, but pretty robust, planning to contest the invaders at every possible point with their Gokunin vassals. Historical records from both sides, of course, tends to exaggerate the size of the opposing forces, with Yuan sources claiming the Japanese numbered 100,000, while Japanese accounts felt vastly outnumbered, suggesting a tenfold disparity. Realistically, the Japanese forces probably numbered between 4,000 to 6,000, while the Yuan invasion force included about 15,000 Mongols, Han Chinese, and Jurchen soldiers, alongside 6,000 to 8,000 Korean troops and 7,000 Korean sailors in various capacities. A notable anecdote from this period involves Tokimune of Kamakura, who, overwhelmed by the imminent threat, sought guidance from his Zen master, Mugaku Sogen, also known as Buko. In a moment of profound anxiety, Tokimune exclaimed, "Finally, there is the greatest happening of my life." Buko queried Tokimune, intended to confront this challenge, to which Tokimune responded with a forceful "Katsu," a shout to intimidate all foes. Buko, pleased, affirmed, "It is true that the son of a lion roars like a lion." This exchange is credited with bolstering Tokimune's resolve and subsequently influenced the spread of Zen and Bushido among the Japanese samurai class. Now, just quickly, that word katsu kind of means like win or be victorious. Now, in Japanese, and I remember in my time in Japan, I was given a gift of several Kit Kats, and it was because I had mentioned to somebody I was taking a test at the time that I was returning to my own country. When I had questioned them why they were giving me Kit Kats, it's because the words sound quite like Kito Katsu, which means basically you will certainly win, or you have to win, it's a very encouraging gift to give to somebody. So, if a Japanese friend of yours is going to take a test or go through some great trial, or perhaps fight off a Mongol invasion, you will perhaps gift them some Kit Kats. Various in their varieties, especially in Japan. Try the green tea ones. Now, I digress back to the 13th century, with its lack of Kit Kats. On November the 2nd, 1274, the Yuan forces embarked from Hopo, now known as Masan in South Gyeongsang Province, Korea. They initiated their invasion by landing on Tsushima Island just 2 days later. The main landing occurred at Komoda Beach, near Sasura, on the northwestern tip of Tsushima's South Island, Shimono. Additional landings took place in the straits separating Tsushima's 2 main islands, and at 2 sites on the northern island, Kamino. According to a historical account, the Soshi Kafu of the So clan of Tsushima, the deputy governor So Sukekuni was able to organize a defense when the invading fleet was first sighted offshore. On the same day, a local shrine dedicated to Hachiman unexpectedly caught fire. Despite this potentially ominous sign, Sukekuni interpreted it as a divine warning rather than an omen of bad luck. Sukekuni and a contingent of 80 mounted samurai and their followers confronted the Yuan invasion force, which the Soshi Kafu claims consisted of 8,000 warriors aboard 900 ships. Once again, could be a bit of an exaggeration. Well, the Mongol forces landed at Sasura around 2 in the morning on the 4th of November, disregarding attempts by the Japanese to negotiate. They quickly engaged using their archers, pushing the Japanese forces to retreat, and by 4, a full confrontation was underway. The vastly outnumbered Japanese defenders were swiftly overwhelmed. The narrative highlights the bravery of one samurai, Sukesada, who is credited with single-handedly defeating 25 enemy combatants in personal combat. Despite these acts of valor, the Japanese forces were ultimately forced back, culminating in a failed cavalry charge by nightfall. Following their victory at Komoda, the Yuan troops proceeded to burn much of the surrounding area and massacred many of the local inhabitants. Over the subsequent days, they consolidated their control over Tsushima Island, leaving a trail of destruction and asserting their military dominance. On November the 13th, the Yuan fleet left Tsushima and proceeded to launch an assault on Iki Island. Here, Taira no Kagetaka, the local governor, mounted a robust defense with 100 samurai and additional local militia. Despite their efforts, they were forced to retreat to Kagetaka's castle by nightfall under relentless pursuit from the Yuan forces. By the following morning, the Yuan troops had completely encircled the castle. Recognizing the hopelessness of his situation, Kagetaka devised a plan to save his daughter. He sent her to the coast, using a hidden passage, accompanied by a loyal samurai named Sozaburo, where a ship awaited to take her safety on the mainland. However, their escape did not go unnoticed. Mongol archers spotted them and unleashed a volley of arrows, fatally wounding Kagetaka's daughter, although Sozaburo managed to survive and later reached Hakata Bay, where he relayed the grim news of Iki Island's fall. In a desperate final act, Kagetaka led a sortie with 36 of his remaining men, of whom 30 died in the ensuing battle. With no alternatives left, Kagetaka and his family chose to honorably end their lives rather than being captured. The brutality of the Mongol forces was starkly demonstrated in their treatment of any survivors. According to the Japanese accounts, the Mongols cruelly mutilated the surviving women by stabbing them through the palms and stripping them of their clothing. They then displayed the bodies on the sides of their ships, a grisly warning meant to intimidate the Japanese and coerce them into submission. It was an act of terror, designed to convey the dire consequences of resistance to the rest of Japan. On November the 19th, the Yuan fleet finally landed at Hakata Bay, just a short distance from Daizaifu, the historical administrative center of Kyushu. The next day witnessed the Battle of Bun-e, also known as the First Battle of Hakata Bay. Thomas Conlin's analysis of the Yuan historical records suggests the forces were approximately equal, with both Japanese and Yuan armies estimated to number around 3,000 troops each, though Japanese historians contend there were as many as 6,000 defenders. The Japanese, unfamiliar with the Mongol military tactics, were reportedly quite confused by the tight shield-protected formation of the Yuan troops, who advanced upon them in close ranks, occasionally hurling paper and iron-cased bombs. These explosives, of course, caused panic among the Japanese horses, disrupting their control in battle. As the battle commenced with a traditional Japanese arrow shot, the Mongols reportedly laughed, dismissing the ceremonial gesture. It's a little bit rude, isn't it? You go to somebody else's country and laugh at them? I suppose the Mongols weren't there for a holiday. While the Yuan general maintained a strategic position on higher ground, directing the battle with drum signals. When the Yuan forces feigned a retreat, they launched iron-bombed shells at the pursuing Japanese, causing disorientation and fear. Contrary to the Japanese custom of challenging foes to simple combat, the Mongols fought in a compact mass, overwhelming individual opponents where they could. According to the history of the Yuan generals commanded their troops from an elevated position, advancing or retreating in response to the different drum beats. When the Japanese moved into the prearranged attack zone, the Yuan forces employing firearms inflicted massive casualties, routing the Japanese forces comprehensively. The battle was intense, but brief, lasting only a day. Despite the chaos of the fight, the Yuan forces managed to push the Japanese back from the beach, killing a significant portion of the defenders and forcing them inland as they set fire to Hakata. As night approached, the Japanese were prepared to defend Mizuki, an ancient moat fort, expecting a renewed assault from the Yuan. However, the attack did not materialize. One of the Yuan commanders, Liu Fuxiang, had been severely injured by a shot to the face during the retreat. In a strategic meeting aboard their ships, Commanders Liu, Holdon, and Hongda-gu debated their next move. While Hold-on advocated for a continued advance, Hong had expressed concerns about troop fatigue and the potential risks of a night ambush. Ultimately, Liu sided with Hong, and the decision was made to retreat to their ships, allowing the Yuan forces to regroup and the exhausted troops to have some respite, leaving the field without further engagement. By the dawn of the next day, the majority of the Yuan fleet had vanished from Hakata Bay. A Japanese courtier recorded in his diary on the 6th of November 1274 that an unexpected eastward wind had fiercely blown, pushing the Yuan ships away. Some of the Yuan vessels were stranded, leading to the capture and subsequent execution of about 50 soldiers and sailors by the Japanese. The historical record from the Yuan Dynasty describes that during this retreat a severe storm wreaked havoc, resulting in many of the warships being smashed against the rocks and wrecked. The exact location and timing of the storm remain a little bit unclear, with different accounts suggesting it might have struck at Hakata Bay, or perhaps as the fleet was en route back to Korea. Reports, of course, vary on the extent of the losses, with some suggesting up to 200 ships destroyed in the storm. Of the original 30,000-strong invasion force, it is estimated that approximately 13,500 did not make it back. Well, after the initial Mongol invasion of 1274, the Japanese shogunate, anticipating a subsequent attack, significantly fortified Kyushu. They organized the samurai more effectively and constructed forts and a massive stone wall, particularly around Hakata Bay, to enhance their defenses more effectively. This wall, built in 1276, stood about 2 meters high and was complemented by a series of stakes driven into the seabed at key landing sites to thwart potential landings by Mongol forces. In a bold display, Kublai sent a group of 5 Yuan emissaries to Kyushu in September 1275 to simply demand submission, but they were unwaveringly refused departure without a response. Hojo Tokimune, the ruling regent, ordered the emissaries to be brought to Kamakura, and then he killed them all. The graves of these emissaries are preserved at Joryuji Temple in Fujisawa, near Kamakura. A similar fate befell another group of 5 emissaries sent on the 29th of July 1279, who were beheaded in Hakata. And I must say, they were pretty brave to put their hands up to go, especially after what happened to the first group. Probably not a wise decision. In the autumn of 1280, Kublai convened a meeting at his summer palace to deliberate on a second invasion plan. This next attempt was distinguished from the first by recent Yuan conquest of the Song dynasty in 1279, which allowed for a more substantial and well-supported assault. The invasion force for this second attempt was notably larger, sourced from various groups, interestingly including criminals granted reprieve from execution and those in mourning, a significant cultural exception in China. The fleet amassed for this operation reportedly included over 1,500 ships, with 600 sourced from southern China and 900 from Korea, carrying a purported force of 40,000 troops from Korea and 100,000 from southern China, although these figures are considered to be more than a little bit exaggerated. The actual size of the Japanese defending force, well, that remains a little bit of a mystery. In the first lunar month of 1281, Kublai initiated orders for a second, more formidable invasion. This time, the two distinct fleets were prepared, the force of 900 ships from Korea and the much larger contingent of 3,500 ships from southern China, to muster the formidable force of 142,000 soldiers and sailors. The command of the entire operation was entrusted to the Mongol general Kublai Khan, with Fan Wen-hu leading the southern route fleet, which faced delays due to logistical challenges. The Korean-based Eastern Route Army was the first to set sail, departing on the 22nd of May. They swiftly engaged in combat, attacking Tsushima on the 9th of June and Iki Island 5 days later. Historical records from the Yuan period detail the heavy casualties inflicted upon the Japanese defenders, including the killing of the Japanese commander Shoni Tsuketoki, though inaccuracies in these records confuse some of the events of June with subsequent July battles. Despite orders to rendezvous with the Southern Fleet at Iki, the commanders of the Eastern Route Fleet, Hong Da-gu and Kim Bang-kyong, prematurely pressed forwards towards the mainland on June the 23rd. They divided up their forces, launching simultaneous assaults on Hakata Bay and Nagato province. However, the attack on Nagato on June 25th was repelled, and the Mongols were once again forced to retreat back to Iki. The assault on Hakata Bay faced stiff resistance due to the newly erected defensive fortifications, including a substantial wall that hindered the Mongols from landing. Attempts to establish a foothold were thwarted by the staunch defense of the Japanese, who utilized arrows to repel the invaders. Thwarted from making significant progress at Hakata, the Mongol forces then occupied the smaller islands of Shika and Noko, intending to use them as bases for further operations. However, the Japanese were not going to let them get away with that, and launched aggressive counter-raids. In one notable incident, one named Kusano Jiro heroically set fire to a Mongol ship and claimed numerous enemy lives. That still only counts as one. Well, I hope you get the reference. Another daring assault by Kawano Michiari saw him board an enemy ship and kill a significant Mongol combatant, despite suffering injuries of his own, and he earned substantial accolades. The ongoing resistance culminated in what is known as the Battle of Koan. On July the 16th, fierce fighting broke out on Iki Island, leading to a Mongol retreat to Hirado Island. As the combined eastern and southern route fleets of the Yuan regrouped, they seized Taka Island before progressing towards Hakata, initiating a 2-week-long battle that eventually ground to a stalemate. The confrontations sprawled across the countryside, reflecting the intense resistance put up by the Japanese forces. On the night of August the 12th, in a display of resilience, the Japanese launched a series of raids on the Yuan invasion fleet. In anticipation of such attacks, the Mongols had strategically chained their ships together, forming robust defensive platforms to thwart the assaults. These measures effectively neutralized the smaller Japanese vessels, which struggled to make significant impact against the fortified Mongol ships. The Japanese efforts during these skirmishes are not detailed in their historical accounts, unlike the earlier documented defense at Hakata Bay. Yuan records describe the Japanese attacks as futile against the superior Mongol fortifications, noting the repeated failures, inducing a palpable sense of fear throughout Japan. Amidst the escalating crisis, the Japanese ruler personally sought divine intervention, visiting the revered Hachiman shrine and the shrine of the sun goddess. In a desperate plea recounted in the Yuan histories, he offered his life in exchange for the salvation of his country. Thus, on the 15th of August, a powerful typhoon, later known as Kamikaze, meaning divine wind, struck the Mongol fleet where it was anchored, bringing catastrophic devastation. Aware of the impending storm, mariners from Korea and southern China sought refuge in Imari Bay, but they failed to find safe harbor, their ships ultimately succumbing to the fury of the storm. In the chaos, thousands of soldiers were cast adrift on fragments of wood or swept ashore where they were mercilessly executed by the Japanese defenders, with the exception of the southern Chinese. Now, why didn't they execute the southern Chinese? Well, it was perceived that they were forced into service. The Japanese were very aware that the southern Song dynasty had just been conquered by the Mongols, and, well, I suppose they must have taken a bit of pity on them. Now, interestingly, we do have an account of the storm from guess who? Marco Polo, of all people. He wrote about the storm thusly. Now it happened one day that such a gale was blowing from the north that the troops declared that if they did not get away, all their ships would be wrecked. So they all embarked and left the island and put out to sea, and let me tell you that when they had sailed about 4 miles, the gale began to freshen, and there was such a crowd of ships that many of them were smashed by colliding with one another. End of the account from Marco Polo. In the aftermath of the typhoon, the commander Fan Wen-hu, with a few navigable ships remaining, abandoned over 100,000 troops, who were simply left to fend for themselves on Taka Island. After 3 days, Japanese forces launched an attack, capturing tens of thousands of stranded troops. Those taken to Hakata were predominantly executed, excluding, of course, the southern Chinese, who were simply enslaved, which, well, depending on where you have to go to do your slave duties, maybe you would have rather just been executed. Well, a Korean account noted that out of the 27,000 Koreans who had departed, about 7,500 never returned. Casualty estimates from the Chinese and Mongol sources for the entire operation range from 60 to 90%. Either figure is not good. Now, of course, many modern historians question the traditionally reported figures, suggesting that they are likely exaggerated. Some analyses propose that the actual numbers could have been exaggerated by an order of magnitude, casting doubt on the feasibility of a medieval kingdom managing such a large-scale invasion, akin to D-Day landings but over a far greater distance, Certainly doesn't seem too believable, doesn't it? But these critiques suggest the true size of the invading force might not have exceeded 10,000 soldiers. Contrasting views argue that despite the likelihood of exaggeration, the substantial resources allocated to the invasions indicate that the fighting force was still considerable, potentially as high as 70,000 soldiers and sailors. A perspective that challenges the notion of a small-scale incursion and suggests significant logistical capabilities, albeit not as extensive as the highest estimates. Well, either way, the failed invasions significantly weakened the Mongols' naval capabilities, particularly affecting Korea, which had been responsible for the construction of ships for the invasions. The extensive deforestation for shipbuilding impaired Korea's naval defense and shipbuilding capabilities for years to come. After all, it takes a while for the trees to grow back, doesn't it? In Japan, since the conflict was defensive and resulted in no territorial gains, the Kamikaze shogunate was simply unable to reward its vassals, the Gokunin, which led to a decline in its authority. The situation contributed to an increase in the number of Japanese joining up with the pirates, who intensified their attacks on the coasts of China and Korea. Now, back in China, the repeated failures led to a recognition of the formidable nature of the Japanese defenses and the bravery of its people. Consequently, during the subsequent Ming Dynasty, the idea of invading Japan was considered 3 times, but ultimately dismissed, reflecting a strategic shift influenced by the outcomes of the earlier unsuccessful attempts. And with that, the story of the Mongol invasions of Japan rather, comes to an end. Thank you very much for joining me, and a special thanks to my patrons and members, Britt, Charles, Stark Factory, JC, Jeffrey, Wendy, and Tim. Thank you very much for supporting. And if you want to support the channel, then you know what to do. Check the video description. But for now, have yourself a good long rest. Try not to set that alarm clock tomorrow. Your body will take what it needs, and maybe it needs a little bit more than you can give it. But good luck. Have a good dream, and I will see you in the next exciting episode. Good night, everybody.